So today what I thought we would do is bring in a world-renowned scholar. His name is Dr. Craig Evans. He's the Distinguished Professor of Christian Origins at Houston Baptist University. He is one of the leading New Testament scholars alive today. He has lectured at Princeton, at Yale, at Cambridge, at Oxford. He has been a consultant to the Bible mini-series television series, which you saw maybe a few years ago last year. He has been interviewed on Dateline NBC. He's been interviewed on the Discovery Channel, on National Geographic. He has written over 70 books. Wouldn't you love to read 70 books at some point? He's actually written 70 books. He's written hundreds of scholarly articles, and he's with us here today at Connexus Church. Would you welcome, please, Dr. Craig Evans? So one of the things that I think is so surprising to a lot of people is we would say the values that even non-Christians embrace. For example, the equality between men and women, opposition to slavery, economic oppression, even the rights of a child, are fundamentally Christian, but we see them as normal. We see them as self-evident human rights. But actually, all of that, you're saying, started with Christianity?
Of course it did. There was no such thing as an orphanage. No one would take in an orphan. Christians changed that. I can show you papyri, letters from antiquity that reach back to a time at the very beginning of the Christian church. The Roman Empire, as pagan as can be. And by the way, it was a military dictatorship that practiced state terror. So have no illusions about it. That's the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago, prior to the Christian influence. And there's a letter that's from the 1st century, and it starts out beautifully. Dear, my sweet sister, it's a man writing his wife and calls her his sweet sister. Don't worry about me if I don't get home right away. I'm staying to work longer. I'll send home my money. And you think, what a guy, good man. And she's pregnant, and he says, I pray to some pagan deity all the time to get you through your pregnancy. And you think, this is a good guy. Then he says, now, if it's a boy, keep it. If it's a girl, throw it out. And just like clunk, a lead bell rings right at the end of his letter.
Wow.
That was the attitude in antiquity. And you know what? We're moving back toward that. But for the Christian church, every child was, in fact, a wanted child.
Made in the image of God.
Absolutely. And so that child was thrown out. And that's what they would do. Abortion was dangerous. So that was rarely attempted. And so the unwanted child is born. Throw it out. Might be deformed, might be sickly, or an unwanted girl. Thrown out, the Christians would take that child in and care for that child.
Wow.
No thrown out child died alone. And many of them survived and grew up and had a life. Christians started that. That's where the orphanage came from. Hospitals were invented. That's a Christian invention. Public education, the university, these are all Christian things because they believed human beings had value, made in the image of God, deserved to be nurtured, educated, cared for.
But some people would say, okay, you say that's Christian, Craig, but don't all religions believe that? And it's just Christianity is one expression.
Not all religions do believe that. For some, there's a fatalistic view, and that is, well, tough beans, you're born into that caste, you're poor, that's your destiny. Well, that's not Christianity.
So these actually are unique Christian values?
That's right.
You can trace them back to the New Testament.
And it had an impact on the West. That's why we are where we are. Now we're becoming...
That's why we think how we think.
We're post-Christian now, to speak generally, as sociologists will say that, and we're moving away from that. But don't kid yourselves. If we do move away from these Judeo-Christian roots, our society definitely will start moving back into a pagan mode. And that will lead to tragedy. It will lead to an undoing of so many of these positive gains.
So people see Scripture as a tool to oppress people or as an ancient, antiquated book. But you argue that Christianity has revolutionized not just our culture, but many aspects of global culture. Can you talk about that a little more, drill down on that?
Yeah, and I'll defer to a historian and a sociologist named Rodney Stark. He's about 80 years old now. He's a distinguished professor, retired at Baylor University. Okay, and you can look him up, Rodney Stark. He's written half a dozen books and in recent years. And this man, as a non-Christian, studied the history of the Christian church just to see how the Christian church impacted the world. it led him to embrace the Christian faith because he realized that was a force for good like nothing else. Wherever the Christian message went and was received and took hold in that culture and became a major influencer, a dominant influencer, that culture was lifted up. That culture was made better. And look around. Parts of the world today where the Christian influence is minimal. It's there, but it tends to be marginalized or oppressed. That's not the place in the world you want to live. He made that observation as a secular person, as a non-Christian. He was so moved by what he observed that it led him to become a Christian. By the way, one of his books ends with a quotation. Back when communist China was a deadly enemy of the Western democracies, the United States and so forth, the Chinese communists did a study. What makes the West so strong? They wanted to figure it out so they could bring it down. Now, that's back in the old bad days in the 70s. And they discovered, you know what it is? It's the Christian faith. And if we're ever going to destroy the West, we got to destroy that. Isn't that interesting? Now that's not a Christian perspective. That's an atheist communist perspective. Stark quotes that paragraph at near the end of one of his books, and he then says, after quoting it, I couldn't agree more with that assessment.